Hey, Ben.
Did it wrong again.
I was testing you. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Carl. And how are you today?
I am good. I was telling you before we got off the call, I just finished teaching my first session of my master class on outreach, and it is a fun crew. And I realized just how much of a dork I am
Now,
when talking about this
now
stuff.
you know. Everyone knew, but now you know.
Oh, yeah. Well, I knew, but now I
No.
I fully own it in my bones now. But how about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Today is my birthday, so
Oh, happy birthday!
thank you. So I'm officially an
I
old man, 37.
see. I don't go on Facebook anymore, barely. So
Great.
I
You're not
now
missing out
have,
on much.
but now I don't know anybody's like when birthdays are happening. That's like the only thing I used Facebook for a long time was just like, okay, whose birthdays are today? Anybody that I know? Okay,
Exactly.
cool. I'm gonna text them. I'm gonna shut Facebook down and just go send them a message like a human.
Right. Well, somebody sent me a message today. It said happy birthday. It was over WhatsApp. I said, "Oh, thanks so much." And then the person sent me like a little cartoon. It's like it was like happy birthday. Oh, thanks. It's like I would never forget. And then you see him like paying like $1 bill to Facebook for like like the like bribing Facebook to remind him of the birthday or whatever. It was great.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh man. So, well, first off, happy birthday.
Thanks, man.
Second, well, that's also I think I already said that, so maybe I'll say it again. I'll say it a third time. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Again.
So, as my birthday gift for you, because I totally knew that before a minute ago and totally planned it, I'm just going to let you pick the topic today, and I'm going to pretend that that's a good birthday present.
Great. Well, today we're going to talk about mastering, but from the mixer's perspective. We are both mixing engineers, but you're sort of becoming a mastering engineer, but you'll kind of put your mixing engineer hat on for this conversation. And I wanted to kind of like, have the conversation, like what's the conversation that mixing engineers have about mastering engineers or mastering in general, the process, mostly the process, not the people as much. But yeah, so I figured this could be an interesting thought experiment of like, there's this like weird space between mixing and mastering, which is blended. And we've kind of already spoken about that a little bit, but let's kind of figure out what the space is in between, and stuff that reasons why we would use a mastering engineer, reasons why we would maybe do it ourselves, and all that kind of stuff. Everything, all that kind of interesting sort of topic. What do you think about that?
And I guess also the things that we look for too. I guess like what do we look for in a mastering engineer, and what do we look out for in a mastering engineer? I think could be a good thing too. Okay,
great. So let's say what's the main reason why you like to use a mastering engineer, Carl?
Objectivity. I mean, short and sweet. Like that's the thing that I know for myself. One of the biggest benefits of having a mastering engineer that I can trust is having a set of trusted ears, and specifically a set of trusted ears that have not heard the song before, to be able to listen to it and not just to make it sound better, make it louder and make it more impressive, whatever, but really to listen to it and flag things that they think are getting in the way of what they believe our intentions were. I don't know if that really if that's too vague of an answer, or if that's good. You tell me.
I think that's pretty good. I think when I'm thinking about like objectivity, which is obviously the first thing I wrote down is things why I would hire a mastering engineer is objectivity 100%. And I think the job of the mixing engineer is to sort of have a bit of a specific focus, or like a zoomed in and a zoomed out focus, right? We have to do both things, right? I talk about like the forest and the trees, right? So I'm focusing on that tree sometimes to sculpt it better so it looks more beautiful in the landscape picture that I'm painting. But I also have to focus on the big picture and see, does this look like a nice forest, And sometimes as a mixing engineer, you just get too deep into those individual trees that at the end of the day, you don't necessarily know if the forest still looks good, or kind of like what you said, like if the forest maybe looks good, but it's the wrong genre or it doesn't sound close enough. Like with pop music, sometimes you have to be a bit more specific. And this is something that's I've totally benefited from using a mastering engineer, of like realizing that my track may have sounded good, but this was not like a poppy enough kick drum sound, or the bass was just too boomy for this genre, or whatever it is. So yeah, kind of like hone you in, because you don't necessarily have that objectivity anymore because you've just done too many reps with the song. And also, like, the fact that they've never heard it before gives that totally unbiased, you know, opinion, which is you just or you're totally biased by the end of a mix.
Yeah, and I think going back to the kind of like metaphor of the forest and the trees and kind of like zooming in, zooming out, one of the I think tell me if you agree with this or disagree with this, but I feel like the more times that you have to zoom in or zoom out, the longer it takes you to be able to refocus,
Yeah, totally.
right? And I think when you're when I think it's almost like a diminishing returns in a way. Like the more times that I have to like big picture, little picture, big picture, little picture, big picture, little picture, the I don't know if I get like creative vertigo. I don't know if that's even
Yeah, it's like
or objectivity vertigo.
your vision is blurry. Like what did I? I'm not sure what I'm. For me, it's like I'll so zoom. Like if I pretend I'm a mastering engineer, I try to master a mix I did, then I will like be focusing on completely the wrong things in the mastering process. Like I'll be hearing like, okay, we added this excitement, this top end, but now I'm hearing harshness and like this frequency, and like nobody's listening to those frequencies. Like, and the mastering engineer can kind of just do that stuff really quickly and just know if it all feels better. The gestalt, the full forest, does it feel better now that I've done this processing? And because we have the baggage of the mix, we're thinking about all these little things that we worked on in the mixing stage, and we can't see that gestalt. But also back to your point, like, yeah, you start to hone in on all these things because you've focused in and you focused out, and you like thinking you're listening to all these like weird things, and you don't know if it's real or not anymore, so to speak.
Yeah, and going back a couple episodes to when I was explaining why I deliver my first mix at the like 80% mark and not trying to get it to like a level of, my what I think the mix should be. That is one of the things that enables me to minimize the number of times that I'm zooming in and zooming out. I stay zoomed out until the 80% mark. And then if I have permission to, if I get the thumbs up that it's like on the right track, well, then I can do my zoom ins, and then
Mm,
I can do a bunch of those zoom ins and then zoom back out. And then, so it's like the only times I'm really like zooming in is like essentially the revision process.
yeah,
So I'm
interesting.
able to retain the objectivity a lot better. And I never consciously thought about that before. Like
Mm,
the zoom the loss of objectivity comes from like the zooming in and zooming out and zooming in and zooming out, which I think your metaphor about the forest and the trees I think just makes so much sense in this case. But I never realized that one of the reasons why I've been able to remain objective longer and get better results is because of the way that I approach that mix one process. It keeps me zoomed out, and I'm minimizing the number of zoom ins and zoom outs without like I wasn't consciously making that the end goal. It wasn't like, oh, I don't want to go in and out of micro mode.
yeah,
It just kind of happened, and yeah, I'm just having this like revelation in real time
yeah.
right now.
I think my response to that, this is great. We're talking about mastering, but we're talking about mixing. Is that like working in shorter spouts helps you retain objectivity, and also passage of time gives you objectivity again, and sort of like working really quickly to get that like 80% mix that we keep talking about, that first pass just gives us a chance to kind of use our gut and really do a full like zoomed out approach to that first mix, because you're not spending too much time in the weeds. You're just like bam bam bam, this is how I feel, let's see if this feels good, before you like start like, getting in there with that fine brush, or carving or whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, like, and I think like the passage of time is like the only thing that seems to help me get my objectivity back, and that just takes time, right? Like,
Yeah, I think another thing that can help is looking at a different forest. And I think that's why,
ooh, I like this.
as a mixing engineer and as someone that works with like a lot of different artists,
Hmm.
the best thing for me to get objectivity is to do multiple mixes a day. But again, like 80% mixes and then doing like a bunch of different revisions all in one day. And rather than trying to get everything done in one shot, kind of like you were saying,
Hmm.
doing like a big chunk of it and then moving on to a
Yeah,
different forest,
I
coming
love
back and
that.
doing like, revisions for the first forest, doing revisions for the second forest, starting at a new forest, and kind of working all of those in parallel
Mm,
rather than doing them sequentially from start to finish.
right.
That it's like a palate cleanser. It's the ginger between bites of sushi. It's just the way to kind of like reorient myself.
I love that. Uh, Question, like, do you listen to reference mixes while you're mixing? Like, whether you're using like Metric AB or are you going on Spotify? No.
The only time that a reference mix really comes into play is either before I start when they're trying to give me a sense of the vibe and they might
Hmm.
be explaining any like particular specific things, but usually it's more of a vibe thing. Or during revisions when it's like, oh, I really like this, the reverb on the vocals in this song at this section. Could we try to do something like that for that last line of verse two? Like that's when that becomes helpful because I feel like references aren't helpful when I'm in the thick of mix one. They're helpful in kind of like being my mood board to set the tone before I start,
Yeah.
and they're really good at like honing in on specific things that they're aiming for. But during the actual, meat and potatoes of the mixing process,
Yeah.
it that's because then I think like I'm switching back and forth between,
Right. That's a zoom in,
you know,
zoom out
that's
sort
a
of
zoom in,
thing.
zoom out, but like, but it's zooming in and zooming out. It's almost like zooming into one song and then zooming back out to another song. So it's like you all even lose that sense of where you're at
Yeah.
in a way because
Yeah.
you're listening to like the holistic energy of your song and then like something very specific in the reference mix or vice versa. And it always ends up being like an apples to oranges thing in
Yeah.
my experience.
When I do
Unless
references, I'm
like
actually usually listening to more of that big picture gestalt thing to kind of see if like what's my like spectral balance or something. You know what I mean? Like if I put on a reference mix, it'll kind of how does my low end, compare to this in a similar genre, or like, how dynamic does it feel? If I'm doing a reference where I don't do references often or usually because like the genres I mostly mix for, it's actually kind of not relevant. Like, so I'm not doing like straight up pop, stuff so
yeah.
often. And like, so like, I guess the stuff I'm working on, it doesn't necessarily need to match like a genre thing so much. But when I do it, it's usually for that reason. But it's also like the reference thing is like another great reason to use a mastering engineer is because they've listened to so many more songs than us. Like on a daily basis, they're just listening to at least 10 songs or something if they're doing a record. So they've just
Yeah.
heard, and this is something that Sam Moses talks about a lot on his podcast and also on the show. He's talked about it. It's just like I'm listening to so many more music, so many more songs than a mixing engineer is or a producer. So like
Yeah.
I just have all those references already in the back of my mind, and that kind of helps me bring your mix towards that reference genre wise.
And I think I want to point out something that for a mastering engineer like Sam, it's not just that he's listening to more songs than mix engineers. He's deeply critically listening to more songs. So even if, like, because I'm sure there's probably at least one listener that is like, well, I listen to a lot of music.
Yeah, I listen
Like
to
I
like
listen to music all the
two
time.
albums a day. Like,
Yeah, but but as soon as you say no, it's like
Mhm.
the depth of listening and
And he's making
the
those mixes into masters many times a day.
yeah, problem solving
Yes,
songs so
love.
much more. So that's why, the references, I feel like the references for me as a mix engineer are most helpful in the beginning stage, but usually it's not the actual songs themselves. They'll give me a list of songs, and then I'll ask them to give me a couple sentences about each of those references to let me know, like, well, what is it about this reference that made you want to suggest it in the first place? And that information is actually what's going to help more than the songs themselves. Then in the mastering stage, or at least in the revision stage, and then off to like the mastering stage, that's when I think the references are really helpful. And I think that's because by that point, you're doing more apples to apples comparisons. And I think that's also, I think, probably something that I don't really enjoy doing as much, which is why those are the situations when I like having a mastering engineer
Mm.
getting involved. Because I'm thinking about this now, and I master like quite a bit of my own mixes, but usually the ones that I'm mastering are the ones that we intentionally, I almost want to say we intentionally don't have any references. And it's like it's the whole song is just it's meant to be its own,
Flavor.
unique, it's flavor, its own universe.
Hmm.
So in that sense, it's a lot less like it's a lot less relevant to other references in that specific way. Whereas like more of like the big pop stuff that I'll do, or not like big pop stuff like, huge artists, but I mean like the stuff that is meant to be more commercial, and very overtly commercial, then it's like, okay, part of being overtly commercial music is the translation and making sure that it works everywhere. And obviously that's still a consideration that I have when I'm mastering my own mixes that are meant to be a little bit weirder, but there's a lot there's a lot fewer expectations from the listener in, weird like avant-garde indie stuff
Yeah.
versus straight
Pop.
pop.
Yeah.
And yeah, now that I'm thinking about
Jinx.
it, the ones that yeah, well, the ones that I tend to do myself are the ones that can be, further off center. And then the ones that I want to get somebody else involved in, it's like, okay, either it's something that is much more like, I don't want to say commercially viable. That's not really what I mean, but I mean like much more broader audience, I think, broader listening base. Not necessarily bigger listening base or audience base, but I just mean like more people would be potentially interested in it. Um, or if it's like an EP or an album, like I I love mastering singles, and I do mastering for some of my students too, and like doing singles. It's so much fun. I really love doing it. I think I'm really good at it. But when it's like EPs or LPs, like
Right.
that's where my brain does not
That's the
like
other side of the
it does not
mastering
work.
equation that I guess people are talking about less and less as albums become less. I think they're coming back into vogue, but like
Yeah.
we've been in this singles period, so people have kind of
Yeah.
forgotten that a big part of the mastering process was, between the tracks, across
Yeah. And
time, all
and
that
and
whole
that's
thing.
like and that is like there's like uh little picture, big picture. That's like the big picture of all the big pictures.
Mm.
Right? That's like the other level of zoomed out. There's the forest, and there's the trees, and there's the forest, and then there's like the ecosystem,
Yeah.
or the climate,
I love
whatever.
ecosystem's
Um
great. I love that.
yeah. And that's I think where like where I know my limits are.
Yeah.
Right. I know that like even with objectivity, that's just not where my artistic strengths lie. And I've
Awesome.
done it before. I've tried it before, but it's never been as good as they could have been, I think,
Yeah.
in retrospect.
Super cool. And I respect that, knowing when to stay in your lane, sort of thing. You talk about mastering yourself, and the main reason why I can't master myself is obviously objectivity, but also like you start to overthink everything, and it's just it's not my wheelhouse. Like, how are you able to? Maybe I'm setting up this question terribly, but like how are you able to master yourself given like the obstacles of doing it yourself based on everything that we talked about until now?
I feel like if I'm mastering my own mixes, there really aren't many obstacles, right? Like I've already problem solved. Hopefully, by that point, I think mastering somebody else's mixes. the role of this is a hot take that probably isn't really a hot take, but like the role of a mastering engineer is to fix other people's mistakes. You know what I mean? Like that's a very blunt way of putting it, but yeah. Um, and hopefully by that point, I've already kind of done that. So at what I'm doing in the mastering stage for my own mixes, I'm just elevating. I'm just taking the dynamic contrast, pushing it to 11. I'm taking the stereo imaging contrast, pushing it to 11. I'm taking the depth, pushing it to 11. I'm just kind of like exaggerating what I did in the mix. And that's really what, hopefully, a mastering engineer can do to a good mix. So it's, it's not as hard for me in the situations that I end up getting really good results, but I think it's because I'm trying. I at no point am I trying to allow myself to kick the can down the road and like fix it in mastering,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like if it's an issue, like if it's
You'll
an issue
fix
in
it
the
in the
mix, like
mix.
yeah, I'm gonna. But well, I mean, like yeah, that usually has a negative connotation to it. But yeah, I'm gonna fix it before I go to that next stage.
Right. How much time do you leave between finishing your mix and doing your master
Honestly, if I go into it knowing, well, either way, I'm actually kind of like mastering
at the same
as
time?
I go at the same time. I usually have it turned off. Like I don't turn it on until I think mix one is ready to be sent to the artist. So I don't have it on. I'm not like I'm not mixing into like a limiter or anything like that. Um, but I'll try to get the mix sounding as solid as I think it can in like in all the big broad strokes, making sure the forest feels right to me. And then I'll, do
Kicking it
some
into
mastering magic on
overdrive
it.
kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And even that is still pretty basic. It's almost like with every round of revisions, the mastering gets
Mm,
tweaked a little bit as I go.
got it.
Because
It's in
depending
the
on, I
same
mean,
project. It's not like you're exporting your mix and then putting it in a mastering project. It's all in the same place,
yeah, it's just in
happening
my
at the
in my
same
same
time.
chain. Yeah, yeah. And that's just what works for me. I before I used to do it in totally separate sessions, and I would wait till the mix is like approved, and I would get mixes approved like without any mastering at all, like without any limiting at all. Um, and I would put it into a totally new session. But the reason that this works for me is because when I start to push it, especially because a lot of the styles of music that I work on tend to be on the louder side, as I start to push it,
Other
I
things become
can
apparent.
yeah, other things become apparent, and I realized that the contrast in balance that felt really good in the mix, all of a sudden, like that contrast is not as big. So now I can go back and very easily just increase the contrast.
Yeah.
So as I'm
Yeah.
making everything louder, I can make the things I don't want to be loud quieter, which
Yeah.
is sounds kind of counterintuitive when you say it that way, but
No. That makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
I remember interviewing Alex Criscione way back in the day. It was maybe a year and a half ago or something, and we were talking about mastering. He masters like his own mixes in like metal, and he feels like getting that loudness. He has to go back into the mix all the time, so it's like sort of like that mastering reveals how you can do different things to get it louder, and how you can maybe adjust your kick drum, getting into that limiter. So there's a way that there's like an art of like pushing boundaries by doing the mix and mastering at the same time, in terms of like just like seeing where there's more wiggle room to do slightly more stuff once you have that mastering processing going. So I
Yeah.
totally understand and dig that.
Yeah, and I think for myself, that's why it really is, song by song. Sometimes it's right for me to do it. Sometimes it's not right for me to do it. And I I can't think of a good way to even like describe what the specific threshold is of, why do I feel comfortable about mastering this song but not that song, even though stylistically they sound very similar. Um, the closest thing I could say is what I mentioned earlier, like the stuff that's a little bit weirder and a little bit more experimental, then I can go ham with it. And the stuff that really is more centered, I want to send that out. But even
And then
that,
you
there are
want that
definitely,
like third party objectivity thing.
yeah. But even that, there are exceptions
Hmm.
too. And I think either way, it comes down to how much objectivity have I how much objectivity have I lost throughout the process? And that
Right.
usually that will trump my preconceived plans of, who I think should do it based on the style. Because
Yeah.
even if I think that I'm the right person for it, if it gets to the point that I've lost that objectivity, then I'm the first person to throw in the towel and say, well, not throw in the towel. That's kind of has the wrong connotation, but like I'll be the first person to say like, okay, I've lost my objectivity on this and I really want this project to be good. I would rather just, send this out to somebody, even if that wasn't in the plan, even if that wasn't what I budgeted for, it's still it's the right thing for the song, and it's the right thing for the client, and also it's the right thing for my brain because I'm just going to drive myself batty
Yes.
if I force myself to do it.
Yeah, that's been my like thing is like when I try to master myself, I usually just drive myself crazy because I obsess about things that I know nobody cares about. But because I've done the mix, I can hear those things and I'm like honing in on things. And it's just so much better for me to have that another person make those choices. And with that lack of, you know, with that objectivity, with that lack of bias, so that I don't have to make that choice. And like you were talking about earlier, sometimes I have to change things in the mix after the mastering has come back because it has is revealed a problem or something in the mix.
Yeah.
And then, but that's usually simple because that's usually just doing a slight tweak in the mix and then just run it through their same mastering chain again. So that usually works out okay. Yeah, and in terms of like sometimes I have to master because it's just like a low budget sort of thing, and you're just kind of like it's like the equivalent of like a a heated ref is going to be what they're going to post, and like that's what it is, and it's
Interesting.
and then sometimes, well, recently we just talked about this, but we were talking about how good Ozone 11 is, so I just demoed it for this project that I was doing, and it was pretty amazing. And then I went back and I realized it was too much, and I kind of turned down the settings and like till I found a nice compromise, and it did a lot of that kind of like enhancing and finalizing, but I still felt like I was missing a bit of that objectivity. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't like I even sent my mastering engineer Connor the mix and the master so he could hear what Ozone did, and he said it was pretty good. Um, but it's like it's still like it can get you where you want to go, but for me, it's still missing that objectivity and that lack of, I still found myself kind of going in those circles of like, is this good? Now I'm hearing this thing in the top end, blah blah blah. Like, I'd rather just get it off my plate and have somebody who's a dedicated mastering engineer say, "Hey, this is cool," and that kind of goes to like one of my points that I wrote down here before we started this call of like that quality control, like which gives you that peace of mind. Like that's such a big part of it, for me at least.
Can I circle back to something you said?
Oh, the low
Because
budget
this is
thing. I
something
know, I
that
know. I saw your
you,
eyes.
you
I could see it in your eyes.
I feel like anybody that knows me listening to this, even if they're not watching it, they're just listening to it, they could hear the face I was making at you
I know.
in their head.
Ben, you're doing it all wrong. Why are you doing low budget stuff?
Well, yeah, but it's less about that because I know a lot of mix engineers, one of the reasons why they end up mastering for themselves is because of a budgetary reason.
Yeah. And that's by the way
And
why I used to master for myself for years. Like I would just be I'll just like, throw on the L1,
yeah, and I feel like everybody has to, pay their dues to some degree in that way.
Yes.
But
Exactly.
do you, I guess when you start talking to a client, do you typically include mastering or do you include like the cost of mastering in the proposal that you send to them, like in the price that you give them? Or is it like, oh, this is what it would cost for mixing and then mastering,
So
talk to somebody
yeah,
else?
so I try to do the former, but depending on the client, sometimes the latter makes more sense, you know? Uh, it, yeah, if I'm feeling more ballsy and I feel like maybe I can pull it off, then I will do the mastering thing. I'll try to, I always try to, I mean, I try to if I can. And yeah,
Well, what do you mean when you
both
feel,
have happened. Both have happened.
but what do you say when you feel ballsy? Like what do you like?
Not even balls.
I know what you,
You know what
I
I'm
know what you mean, but I mean, like, I know what you're saying by that part, but I mean, like, when you're feeling ballsy, you do what versus when you're not feeling ballsy, you do what?
If I'm feeling ballsy, I'll include mastering in a higher rate because I know that I want to have that full package to offer, and I try to do that. But then there's times when you just know that it's not going to be that kind of they're not going to be able to afford that. So you kind of have to give them the full package up front, or you have to say like, this is what's available. This is what my mastering engineer takes, you know, in order for them to kind of see versus like, hey, this is the full rate, including mastering, with a dedicated
Oh,
mastering
I guess
engineer.
I meant like w- versus. I meant like when do you include, the cost of another mastering engineer as opposed to, you know, not including another mastering engineer and just doing it yourself, which you were saying was like the lower budget
Oh, no,
projects.
no, no. So no, for this project, I quoted them like they were barely able to get like my rate, but then they gave me my rate, but they're like, that's it. We don't have anything else. And it wasn't gonna I wasn't gonna be able to pay out of that for a mastering engineer. So it was like, this is what it is. And
Gotcha.
so like,
So you weren't like offering it outright as like there are
no,
two options. You can have me do it,
because
or you can have somebody else do it for more money.
I mean, I handled that conversation of like, yeah, and this is what the mastering engineer is going to take this and charges that, and they're like, oh no, there's not going to be anyone else. It's just going to be you. I was like, oh, okay, fine. I have no choice here. But 90 at this point, 95% of my mixes get mastered properly,
Okay.
and not by me,
Yeah. Well, no, I
obviously,
was gonna say, yeah,
obviously.
yeah. Interesting. I guess I'm just thinking about it, and like what I used to do for a very long time was to have the higher rate be, the main rate that I would say would include outsourcing the mastering, and then I would have like a secondary rate that would be a little bit less that has me doing the mastering, and I would explain to them the benefits of having the outside person, and why this engineer is like such a badass and they're so great. They're a big old teddy bear and great to have on the team. All the things.
Yeah,
But then what I started doing, and maybe this is a ballsiness thing, or just having the confidence to do it. But I just like whether I master it or somebody else masters it, it's the same price. Like I don't charge less if I do it because I feel like I want to make the choice of who masters it based on the song and the art, not on the budget. And I know that sounds pretentious, and I'm sorry to anybody going, ugh, while they're listening to this, because I know that's not in the cards for
we
everybody.
just
And that
lost
was
30
not in,
listeners. They just
I know.
stopped the podcast right now.
But that also like that wasn't, I guess what I'm saying is like for the longest time, that wasn't something that I could really do either. But what I'm saying is as soon as you can start taking that kind of an approach, try to be conscious of when you can take that approach and try it. Because I think as soon as you start doing that, I think it signals to the client. I think some people will think that signals that like, oh, well, getting another outside mastering engineer isn't valuable. But I think what it really signals to the good clients that kind of pick up on this stuff is that you're putting their song first, like their song, their vision, like whatever it takes to get the song to reach their vision. That is the choice that you're going to make. And that like, yeah, sometimes it's me, sometimes it's so and so, but ultimately, like I'll make that final decision based on my experience, based on my perspectives, and where I think what I think is going to be the best for the song. And it
Yeah,
might even change from song to song, But I think when you go into it that way, and that's a way to really signal to them like how important their song is
right.
to you, as opposed to how important the objectivity is to you. Even if the objectivity is a really big thing for us to think about, that's not the most effective way to sell mastering. Sell them the idea of getting a mastering engineer.
Yeah, yeah.
And usually, if you
I
frame
totally I
it,
totally hear that, and I think it's also about how you say it and you pitch it. But my pushback would still be like, isn't the best thing for the song almost always to have an extra set of ears give it a quality control, quality assurance? Like, isn't that always in my mind? If I feel like it is, at least for what I'm working on.
Okay, I like this argument. What I would say is that quality assurance doesn't always have to be another person actually doing the master. It could just be somebody, like we talked about our circle of feedback
Yes,
a couple
yes,
episodes
yes.
ago. It could
Hmm.
just be like having friends that you can feel comfortable saying, "Hey, could you just give this a listen and let me know if anything jumps out at you?" Like I'm sure we all have friends that would happily, give us 3 minutes of their time,
To
to
listen to
give us
music, yeah.
their listen to the music and like give us their feedback. So I'm not saying if you master your own song, you're not allowed to let anybody else influence that. I'm saying that you can get feedback and you can have, some other people like doing, flagging the quality issues without having them also be the one that is fixing the quality issues, if that
Nice.
makes sense.
Well, that kind of like goes to my my story of this low budget project that I mastered myself. I still sent it to my mastering engineer to have a listen. So that's
And that's amazing that he was willing to do that. You know what I mean? Like, because I feel like there's too many people in the industry that would be like,
yeah.
well, you're not hiring me. Fuck you. I'm not going to listen to your song and give you feedback. So the fact that there are good ones out there,
Well,
that's great.
he knows that I'm gonna try to give him work whenever I can. I just had no choice here. But yeah, it was interesting. I had another client, another artist that I did a mix for, and got it properly mastered. But he was just like so interested in me trying the new Logic AI mastering feature. He's like, I just want to see what that sounds like. I was like, okay. So I did it for him, which I felt kind of like, I don't know if this is like gonna be bad for everything if I send him this, but he asked for it, so I guess I'll just do it. And like Connor's master was so much better than the Logic's, AI
Yeah.
master, but it was interesting. Like sort of like how Ozone is interesting because it kind of opens up things and shows you maybe where the weaknesses in the mix are. And I think the Logic mastering does a decent job at that with like its, like EQ curve. And you could kind of hear like, oh, there's a bit of boominess there and there's a bit not enough excitement there or something. But other than that, it's just not doesn't have the same sort of like impact as like
Well,
Ozone or a real mastering engineer, you know?
I mean that's really the thing. Like it's a tool. It's a tool that can like kind of help to get you closer, but it's never going to have the not just the experience, but I think specifically the understanding of the vision and like understanding what you want. Like that's not like AI is not going to be able to have that kind of an understanding and be able to know how to apply it to the master. So I think I'm yeah. So I use Ozone 11 all the time. I think it's great, but it's like we said I think in an earlier episode, like it's never just hit go and then hit bounce. It's like okay, this is like a tool that's helping me get there a little faster, but it still requires ear, it still requires context, it still requires
Yes.
nuance, it still requires you to say, I see what you did there, but that's not what we want, and being able to make those decisions. And I think the decision making and the tastes and the focus on the vision is really what's going to help to keep that's what's going to keep us going. That's why I'm not worried about the AI technology like replacing engineers. I think it's just going to replace the engineers that don't put their focus in the right things. Again, another maybe hot take, but
Yeah. Maybe we'll do a whole episode on AI in the future.
you've been teasing me with that since I think
Not on
episode
purpose.
1.
Not on purpose.
Yeah.
But
It's like I just want to talk about it.
you do want to talk about it?
Oh, all the time.
All the time, Carl. Okay.
Claude 3 is out now. I'm like so excited.
Okay.
You don't
Okay.
even know what that is.
We'll keep this on the agenda for future recording date. You got
Yeah,
it.
bullshit. I don't believe it.
No, it's gonna happen. You can't avoid these things. You know.
Yes. So let's recap. I think.
Yes. Let's do a quick little
Okay,
recap. This is great. This was
'cause this wasn't
a
a
fun episode. I love how like mastering just like made us think more about mixing, which then made
Yeah,
us
well,
think
that's
more about mastering.
Yeah, well, it was like we wanted to do. It's talking about mastering from the mix engineer's perspective, and like how do we perceive its role in our music, and how do we perceive, our role in it, if that makes sense. Not just the act of mastering or the service of mastering, but what mastering can do to elevate or destroy the artistic intent.
Oh, and it can destroy. And I feel like also like
Yeah.
this is maybe like a extra little thing that I'm bringing to the table as like a producer slash mixer is like signing off on the mastering engineer and signing off on the master. And kind of like I almost feel most like a producer when I'm, kind of liaisoning between the artist and the mastering engineer, because I know what the artist's vision is because I've taken it so far with the mix, and making sure that the master is something that's going to compete and it sounds as polished and as forward sounding as it's going to sound, and it still matches the artist's vision of the song. I feel like that's when I'm most a producer because I'm tying it all together. And even though the mastering engineer is finalizing the song, as the producer, I'm guiding everyone into this moment together. So, uh,
Yeah,
like, and I love that.
absolutely. I think that's why I look at myself, even when my service role is primarily just mixing, a lot of times I do end up being the producer in the old school sense of like coordinator and like I was supposed to say like project manager, not
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
logistics
yeah.
of it, but
I know
like
100%.
the the
I totally
person
resonate with that.
like the personnel manager maybe, like I'm usually the one that's like recommending, oh, you should get real drums on this. Like I see what you did there with the program drums, but it's just not quite the same. And I think you should hire so and so. Oh, for mastering, we should get so and so. Oh, I think uh I know you hate editing vocals, even though you're a great vocal producer, but like I can recommend you to somebody that can do the editing and crush it for you and keep you on budget. Like I like being the dot connector
Right. Even
in
though
that
exactly, it's
sense.
like we're just like one node in the system, we can influence all the other nodes around us to make a better, product.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. So what's our our TLDR bow on this
See,
episode?
we could just ask AI what our TLDR is, but not this episode, Ben,
Not this
apparently.
episode, Carl.
Okay.
Well, dude, it's a
I mean,
mastering
really,
episode. It's not an AI episode. Come on, you
I
know that.
know.
You know that.
I know. Okay, so I think really what we look for as mix engineers, what we look for in a mastering engineer and what we look for in the experience of working with a mastering engineer is objectivity, uh, contextually relevant feedback,
Yes.
and ultimately peace of mind.
Yes.
Am I missing anything? Like those are like
Yeah.
kind of like
No,
the
that's great.
big three.
It's great because we didn't even talk about how the mastering engineer might point out our flaws in our mix or whatever, because that's a whole other element of it as well for me. Um, but yeah, objectivity, giving us that relevant feedback, like you said, peace of mind, quality assurance, and knowing the record is done. So we respect and salute the mastering engineers, and yeah, and all that stuff. This is fun, Carl.
It was fun. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate your general, humanness and being here and you're wonderful and it's your birthday
Oh, come
and
on.
it's great. And before I forget,
Thank you, Carl.
oh thanks. Before I forget though, I have to tell you something.
Yes.
Bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl. Thank you.